Hello, movie monkeys. Welcome to our, I think, 4th video. This time, you just saw it, 28 days later, wearing my horror shirt. Freddy and Jason, sitting in a tree.
Wearing my buffalo plaid, completely unrelated.
Well, we don't have any corrections for 28 days later.
We were perfect.
I think we nailed it this time. If there's a correction to make, I don't know what it was. Although we can say that we have watched 28 weeks later since we recorded this episode, which is on Disney+, unlike 28 Days Later. We talked about that during the episode. It's a pretty good sequel, even if the characters make some maddening and selfish decisions, especially the kids. And by the way, before you respond, Bev, I'm Ryan Ellis.
I'm Bev
This
Ellis.
is Bev Ellis. We didn't say our names. We should have said our names, especially when we're new at doing on-camera YouTube stuff. Okay, so I just said that. The kids are terrible people. The family's terrible. I'll do a nutshell, and then you can respond. My nutshell is, family of 4 ruins what's left of England.
And the world!
As it turns out, yeah.
It truly is a movie about a bunch of people, well-meaning, just through self-preservation, making a series of the worst, most irresponsible decisions, starting with the kids. It's truly their fault. Actually, Dad really crossing a line.
And Mom, in some ways.
Well, I mean, is it her fault? She's
Yeah,
sick.
I guess you did say that she doesn't know that he shouldn't touch her, although maybe she should know that. But
She doesn't seem to be altogether with it. As much as she's not as far gone as all the other people who are sick, she's clearly not all there either.
she went loco.
She went a little loco.
So a good sequel, though, in any case.
Yeah,
And
great action movie.
Jeremy Renner's in it, and Rose Byrne playing an American.
I will say the difference between who directed it.
Oh, I forget. Some dude, I
Okay,
don't recognize
so
his name.
whoever did direct it wasn't Danny Boyle, and his style of directing action on a budget was a lot more like, okay, well, we can't afford the stuntman or everything to do with this, so let's just get the camera up close. Oh, it's just a bunch of noise and a bunch of stuff, and the action is not really all that well directed, but it works for the film, and it's a fun enough film regardless of the fact they kind of half-ass that stuff.
Juan Carlos Frenadillo.
I knew that. That's what I said.
Looking it up here, that's what it says. I probably said that wrong. So next movie to talk about, it's not really new anymore, but Triangle of Sadness. We watched it on her birthday, which was a few days ago.
It was my birthday movie because I do love the director, even though I still can't pronounce his name.
Ruben Östlund.
I make him say it.
Or Östlund.
It was a pretty divisive movie. A lot of people didn't like it. Not me. I loved it.
I even liked it considering the puking, which I was going to avoid seeing the movie because of that.
Warning.
I'm not a fan, but especially, this has probably come up in the podcast before, when it's, Bev, oh my God, what happened? I don't know, something traumatic.
Rusty's dead!
Yeah. Bruh. But this is motivated. I don't want to give anything away, especially about that awesome third act. Maybe not awesome, but very surprising. I did not know where this movie's going. But the puking in this movie, even though it's excessive, at least it made sense why they are puking.
I think to enjoy the movie, you have to be a little bit prepared going in that it's going to be weird. I guess it's just not like a real 3-act story that we're used to. It's definitely not a very Hollywood type of movie, but it's really funny, very entertaining and engaging. I remember you were saying that's not a boring movie at all. And it feels kind of exciting and new, even in a landscape
Exciting and new.
Even a landscape
The love boat,
where-
the puke boat.
even a landscape.
Soon we'll be vomiting on the deck.
Stop trying to silence women, Ryan.
I'm making it funny, I think.
Even in this landscape where it feels like we get a new class war comedy every 5 minutes, this one still stands out.
And all 3 of his movies have been about that same basic idea, haven't they? Maybe not force majeure so much.
Yeah, they've all had class consciousness. Definitely Force Majeure is conscious of the class that's showing, and more so in The Square, where it's making fun of upper middle class people a lot. And this takes it to yet another level. It's like he ramps it up with every film.
So Triangle of Sadness, we actually recommend it. Not new, but newish. New to us, anyway. We haven't been to the theater. We thought we would have gone to the theater in the week off we had, but we did not. Maybe we will before we post the next video. And we'll talk about whatever that movie is then. Maybe Babylon. Another movie apparently that has an awful lot of scatological things in it.
It's the year of that. Year of poop and puke.
So the next thing, I guess the last thing, is listener feedback. We addressed an email last week during our Before Midnight video that asked why during our A Star is Born episode we didn't talk about the scene where Jackson pees himself with the Grammys. And we also didn't get into Allie's La Vie en Rose performance. Anne asked us about our thoughts about those scenes, but we didn't say we actually thought about those scenes. We just addressed that we didn't cover those things she specifically asked us about covering. So, Jackson peeing himself at the Grammys, is it deliberate? he's so bombed, I don't think it's deliberate.
I don't think it's deliberate. I don't think he knows what's going on. I think he's so far out of it that he actually is confused about who won the award.
I think in previous A Star is Born movies, it's supposed to be a little bit more deliberate, but still not fully mean-spirited. But there's always a bit of a mean-spirited jealousy thing going on in all the versions of A Star is Born.
I think the part that's intentional is that during a night that was definitely her big night, he got that wasted. That's the crime. So yes, he humiliated her, and that was not his fault. It was because he was so blasted. But why were you that messed up on a night when it really mattered for you to be on your best behavior? That's why he feels guilty, and that's why he ought to feel guilty, and why he needs to be forgiven.
And the last time he ever performed live, probably.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The movie portrays that.
Yeah, because then he goes to rehab, and then, it's over.
Oh, no. And the second part of it is La Vie en Rose.
Well, I love the story.
What's to say about that, except that she really can belt, and she belts out that song better than... Who was it that sang it originally?
Edith Piaf.
Edith Piaf.
But here's the story, is that when he was casting, he just happened to see her perform that song at some show. I can't remember what the details were, but he was at a show. She was performing. She sings La Vie en Rose just like she sings it there, the full French with all of her star power on display. And he saw her in that moment, and he thought, that's the performer that Jackson could fall in love with at first sight. That's the performance that he would fall in love with. So he cast her. So, I mean, at that point, she had been acting a little bit, but she had never done anything as challenging as this movie.
He was the person that saw her, the one person in the crowd that saw her.
100 people in a room, and only
the underdog
one.
That is Lady Gaga at that point in her career. And we finally addressed the actual questions Anne had about A Star is Born. The second point is Old No Names. Old No Names? Yeah. Suggested last October that we cover a Terrence Malick film. And I said we'd probably do one in the fall this year. Well, it's getting fast-tracked because Badlands is available. We recorded it from TCM. And we're going to cover that next month. It's still January. For our month of Crazy Stupid Love. So you've never seen Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek before in this film, and you're going to soon.
I know almost nothing about it. I know the bare bones of the plot. As a person who doesn't love Terrence Malick, respect him, but he's just never been one of my filmmakers. A lot of people have told me that this is the movie that I need to check out, that I might enjoy regardless.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's going to be the end of February, so about a month from now. I'm going to do She Done Him Wrong. Cover it, whatever. On Friday, but the usual thing when I do an episode by myself, it'll just be the audio with our logo, which you're going to see soon for this podcast. But thanks for listening. Please subscribe at HYES Ellis. I guess you know that. That's how you found this, I guess. But let's build up the channel, get more people listening, and I guess watching in this case. We're still doing on-camera stuff. It's only been 9+ years of doing audio recording, and now finally video recording also.
Almost 10 years. Mm-hmm. Very, very close.
You'll see our Twitter addresses in a few seconds here when we have the graphic up through the podcast. But it is the same podcast that is online otherwise through Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. So thanks for watching us. Got the horror shirt on. We really didn't talk that much about 28 Days Later, but here comes the podcast for 28 Days Later. I don't think coffee is the first thing you'll seek out during our inevitable rage-filled apocalypse. It's going to happen. But the good news is that we're not quite at the point where we're having to run for our lives. Maybe by the spring. And since we still live in a mostly normal world, I'm going to go ahead and promote our sponsor. Feel free to interrupt me if a chimp goes haywire and exchanges blood with anyone, Bev. Keep me posted.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Watch the wires. So Spark Plug Coffee is what I'm talking about. There are big signs advertising Nescafe in this movie, and I won't push back on Danny Boyle for promoting that bag of beans, since Sparkplug is not international. Well, they are, but not overseas international. Sparkplug offers the freshest beans in Canada, which are fairly traded premium Arabica beans. People who live here in Canada, or our neighbors to the south, can get in on this. Americans can't get free delivery, but Canadians can, and folks in both countries will get their jab in a week, or even less. Also, if you like decaf or half-cat, they've got you covered. Any chimp attacks yet?
No, negative.
Nobody's bleeding on somebody. No chimps, sir. But ordering only once, while certainly your choice, is a mistake on the level of driving to Manchester just because some dude on the radio told you to. Sparkplug members can be part of the Autopilot Coffee Club and get their stuff sent as regularly as they want. They also get perks and deals that the casual consumer does not. So don't think of this as a Coffee of the Month club. You can customize your membership and you can pause it or cancel it anytime you want. Sparkplug.coffee is your link, but add HYES for Have You Ever Seen, and you can then take advantage of our promo code. That'll save you 20% on your next order. This extra money in your pocket won't be all that useful in the post-chimp attack world, but again, we're not quite there yet. Right, Bev?
No one yet.
Okay, thank God. So go to sparkplug.coffee and peruse their menu to find out what roasts and blends suit you best, including the option of a rotating seasonal blend. None of this will matter if getting a drop of blood in your system will turn you into a maniac in less time than it takes to watch a typical TV commercial. But for now, Andrew Luther, please play that new Have You Ever Seen theme music.
And action.
Have you ever seen...
28 days later.
Hello? 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 Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay, hi. All right, well then, hi, you non-infected podcast fans, and thanks ever so much for downloading episode number 487 of Have You Ever Seen, the classic movies podcast that drops every Monday, and also every other Friday. We were once known as the Top 100 Project, and if you want to know just how long we called ourselves that, scroll back in our extensive archive to see a hell of a lot of film reviews. Although at this point, recording this on the 8th of January, there's still this weird combination of our logo one place and then the name in one place and the logo.
Yeah, it's taking a bizarrely long time to catch up.
Spotify and Apple Podcasts drive me crazy. Maybe by the time this goes up, that'll be long since fixed. And almost all of our podcasts have spoilers, just as this one will today. I'm the bicycle courier who woke up alone in a hospital, naked, and then managed to get the hottest woman left in the world to fall for me. He's pretty good looking, too. Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who chose this movie for the 8th annual month of Bev, even though I thought she had seen more than enough of dangerous viruses.
Never.
My wife, Bev.
That's me.
Okay, the coming attractions trivia for this week's picture. Only one infected person ever actually speaks in 28 Days Later, or in the sequel, 28 Weeks Later. What does that person say?
Is it wait? When Mark is infected, his last words are wait.
I think she got me a technicality there. I'm talking about somebody who's fully infected. Clearly, he just got it.
So, Brendan Gleeson, is that the one you're talking about?
No.
Oh, it's the army officer who's infected?
The boy in the diner that Jim kills hisses, "I hate you." Although I watched that clip again a few days ago just to confirm this, and it is hard to tell if he's saying anything. I read that years ago, and then I read that nobody else ever speaks when they're properly infected in these two movies. So I want to make sure that he does say something. I think it's pretty debatable. You've got a good point there. These guys have been infected. They're not fully turned yet. The point is that much like zombies, they don't speak, usually. Although zombies in Day of the Dead do, I think, don't they? That bub? Braids.
There's probably already listeners who are clamoring to tell us that they're not zombies, they're infected. Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have both been clear. Well, they're not zombies. They are not the living dead. They are living people who are infected with a rabies on steroids type virus.
They're so mad.
They're so mad.
They're like our Pomeranian fox always was, so mad.
It's our impression of our very fluffy little dog who was so angry all the time. But these very mad people are not zombies in the strictest sense. But you know what? This is a zombie movie in every thematic way, and in the way that it became the first of the zombie renaissance. It led a whole renewed interest and enthusiasm for zombie movies.
Yeah, 2 years later, Dawn of the Dead, the remake, and also Shaun of the Dead came out. Two of my favorite zombie movies. I think the remake of Dawn of the Dead is awesome. And Shaun of the Dead is one of the funniest movies,
Zack
period.
Snyder version of Dawn of the Dead.
I think it's very good.
I agree. I think it's wonderful. And in that movie, the zombies are fast like they are in 28 Days Later.
Influenced by this.
But they are dead like in every other zombie movie.
Yeah.
So that's the only real distinction with 28
It's a
Days
mixture.
Later, 28 Weeks Later, is that they're not technically dead. They're not like reanimated corpses.
Well, George Romero kept making zombie movies past 2004 when that came out, or those came out. And in his movies, I believe they were always the slow ones, the type. Although one of them uses a machine gun in, is it Land of the Dead? But then, in the very first ever acknowledged zombie movie, 1968, Night of the Living Dead, there were zombie movies, but it was more, they were hypnotized, basically. And it was from the Caribbean, Cuba or something like that. But in Romero's 68 movie, the first one we ever see uses a rock to try to break the car window.
Ah, that's right. They're kind of like vampires, where every vampire book or movie or TV show, they have their own lore that fits the theme of their show, but there's certain components that are always the same.
But this one does start out in an animal testing factory. Monkey Vengeance, we'll say then. Monkey Vengeance was released in the UK in November 2002, but Fox Searchlight brought it over to our part of the world nearly 20 years ago in June 2003. It cost about 8 million smackers, but made more than 10 times that amount worldwide. Bev, we've discussed the plot a lot already, but please remind everyone what it's about and give them the skinny. 28 Days Later, the skinny.
All right. Cillian Murphy is Jim, who wakes up from a coma to discover the city of London completely deserted except for victims of a terrible epidemic that turns people into ruthless, bloodthirsty monsters. Jim meets other survivors, tough, pragmatic Selena and father-daughter Frank and Hannah. Together, they follow a radio signal to a holdout army outpost where they're met by a handful of soldiers whose warm welcome reveals itself to be an insidious plot to lure women into sexual slavery. So, Jim goes feral and kills the lot of them.
Basically becomes an infected himself. He looks like one. He's half naked, like a lot of them are. And he's covered in blood. And by the way, you said about being bloodthirsty. They're not really eating. Another distinction between this and zombie movies.
You're right. They're just killing them. They're just out to destroy.
Great example.
They don't kill each other.
Great example is Mailer, the black guy at the compound, who they're keeping to see how long somebody who's infected will last without any food or water, I guess, but especially food, because rain would eventually give them some water, although there's a drought. Frank says that in the apartment. And at the end of this movie, there's a downpour of water. Makes me wonder if that's supposed to be thematic. It probably is. It's finally raining, but also this little group of people, what is it, a dozen people in total, the good guys and bad guys. There's an apocalypse within the apocalypse, but finally we have rain, which we need to survive anyway. Yeah, they don't eat each other, but they do dump their blood from their mouth. They barf on other people, and that gets them infected. Well, even a tiny little drop of blood gets in Frank's eye. All it takes. Bing! Turned.
It's remarkably similar to rabies. People who are infected with rabies get hydrophobia. They become afraid of water and they can't drink water.
Okay.
And apparently that's because water will dilute the virus that lives in your saliva and they'll actively try to bite people. The virus takes over your brain and it makes you do things that spread the virus.
Also, the rage virus in this movie is based on Ebola, I was reading. The rash, the red eyes, the bleeding.
Ah.
So 2 things then.
I'm more scared of Ebola than I am of zombies, let me tell you.
Yes. Well, I didn't do it yet, so in a nutshell, where is everybody?
Hello!
Okay, the infected aren't dead, quote unquote, and they gather maybe like the humanoids do in I Am Legend and all those series, the Richard Matheson series and the Will Smith movie that came after this. But why are there so few dead bodies amongst the carnage? Yeah, they're in that church and the infected are among them as well, but not very many. Where is everybody?
So, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland. Alex Garland wrote the screenplay.
This is a practical answer, isn't it? It's going to be a practical thing. Why?
No, it's not practical. They knew that it made no sense to have the hospital and the streets of downtown London totally void of corpses. But they made the choice to do it that way to keep that really dreamlike, mysterious quality of the opening where Jim wakes up.
It is a great opening.
Especially the first time you see this movie and you're just living that moment through Jim's eyes and how surreal it is. It's really cool and it sets the tone perfectly because the movie does keep coming back to this notion that they're living in a nightmare, that Jim might wake up from this nightmare at any time, and in fact actually has a nightmare within the nightmare. He dreams that he's been abandoned, left alone, but the friends that he's made, truly alone in this terrifying world, and then he wakes up to discover while he's still living in a nightmare, he's still with his friends.
And right before that, that great music, I think it's the same tune, it sounds like it, that was in Traffic a few years earlier, the closing credits of that. And it's called an Ascension or Ascending, something like that. Brian Eno, I believe.
Ah.
Love that music so much. Anyway, where is everybody is also a valid question practically, or an answer, I should say, that's practical, which is they had to shut down the streets of England. They were using digital photography, which doesn't look very good, but it was such a new thing. And the only way you can get these kinds of shots in London, have the police shut things down really early morning on a weekend, is to shoot as fast as possible. And they were not going to be able to do that with regular old film cameras.
Not with an $8 million budget.
And that's why you can't have a bunch of people lying around either, because that's a lot of, well, they already
Extras,
had some
yeah.
production design that they had to put on the streets, I guess, and around, but not that much. If a bunch of extras are laying around looking like they've been killed in some kind of way, most people, of course, are going to join the other infected, but there's got to be some people that just randomly died. But put 50, 60, 100 people, even that many around, and then your time is gone and you can't get these shots after all. So when I said practical, that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. And one of the marketing appeals of this movie, kind of like Vanilla Sky a few years earlier, was the surreal footage of downtown London, empty of people, a sight no one had ever seen before. They had a vision and they had a budget and they knew this was the only way they would ever accomplish it is if they shot digital, which at the time felt really innovative. They weren't the only people to do it. I think it was in 99, Dancer in the Dark came out, that Lars von Trier movie, which was shot on digital and allowed, with a small budget and a small team, to create these really creative shots. It just frees up the filmmaker to put the camera all these interesting places that you really couldn't with a cumbersome 35mm camera. Also, it was actually kind of an exciting new format. Of course, it looks like garbage now. It looks remarkably bad now because this is standard definition. So this was made before high def took over.
And we saw the Blu-ray that we owned.
Oh my god.
Ironic.
We were like, why do we own this
I know
Blu-ray?
because I didn't own this movie until I was buying Blu-rays, and I think it was pretty cheap or something, so I thought, why not buy it in the best format?
It's not like it looked any worse than the VHS copy that I had that I used to watch it on. And it kind of reminded me of what it was like to watch old VHS movies. No matter how good the movie was, for most of our lives, or half of our lives, they looked terrible.
We didn't know, but they looked bad.
The first many times I saw movies like Godfather, The Shining, or even something like Lawrence of Arabia, I was watching it on a VHS copy, so it feels like taking you back to that moment in time. There's something a little nostalgic about it for people our age and older.
It also fits this kind of movie. A grindhouse horror film, maybe not an homage, but that type of movie. So looking bad is fine. When they did Grindhouse, Tarantino and Rodriguez, they made it look bad on purpose after the fact.
And 28 Days Later was only a couple years after Blair Witch Project, which was a found footage movie, which was shot on film, but this has a found footage feel. I do believe it was influenced by Blair Witch Project.
A lot of Blair Witch was the handycam thing, right? Because they were making, in the storyline, they were shooting a documentary, but they were also shooting themselves,
That's right? It's both formats.
That's why they had to do that first to actually have a movie, because otherwise it wouldn't really work. The digital audio, the DAT, they had to use that for filming when she would talk to people and when she was on camera, granted. But how do you have sound otherwise? Because you wouldn't be using that anyway, so that's why they had to use that cheap-looking thing. It also was a cheap way to get your footage on screen for that movie that cost a couple dollars.
Yeah, there was this little mini revolution in independent films when digital made everything cheap in the late 90s, early 2000s.
And then movies like this and Blair Witch were big hits, especially that.
It was exciting for these young filmmakers to really have the leash taken off when it comes to your budget and all the things you can do in a short schedule with like a really limited budget.
Boyle wasn't that young or new. We've covered two of his movies before, one that came after, one that came before. Trainspotting was before, and Slumdog Millionaire, the Best Picture winner, was, well, compared to America, 6 years later for the Brits. Okay, then, let's talk about the numbers. There aren't that many, but very good Rotten Tomatoes numbers. 87% of critics like this film. 7.4 out of 10 is the average. There are 235 reviews on there, and 85% of audiences. We meant to watch 28 Weeks Later, which is on Disney+, although this isn't, for some reason, even though it was. Fox Searchlight.
It's not anywhere.
That's true.
If we didn't have the Blu-ray, we would have had to get it from the library.
I tried to find, because the DTS was not going to work on our soundbar in the living room. We've since fixed that, and now it'll be fine. But it wasn't going to happen, so where do I get this from? It wasn't available I could see through YouTube or Prime. It wasn't on Netflix, any of these kinds of places. The library was going to send it to us, and they did, but I canceled it because we got the DTS to work. But the point is, we should have had the option of paying for this somewhere. You know how cheap I am, but I'm ponying up the money for this, and I couldn't.
I was so shocked. You can't even rent it. This movie was popular, still is popular.
So anyway, 28 Weeks Later's Rotten Tomatoes numbers are pretty good too. 72% and 66%. Also has a great opening. Much different than what happens in 28 Days Later. Well, the very opening of this movie, of course, isn't Jim. It's the activists. So fuck you, Alex Palmer, Bindu Destapani, and Yuka Hitunen, I think it's his name, or her name. The three activists, they're the first three people credited, because they're the ones that let the chimp out that attacks her. I guess it must be Bindu. They're the actors' names, by the way, I just read out. Just as activists as a credit. But fuck them, because they started this in the first place. But 28 Weeks Later has a great opening. The actual, I think, very first shot and the next 5 or so minutes. So maybe we'll still watch, even though it won't affect this podcast now, because we'll watch it after we recorded it. Okay, so 66 is where this movie was in 2003 at the U.S. box office. It made about $500,000 more than Lost in Translation, which we've covered. And Elf, which we love, we watched that last month, was number 7 in 2003. 28 Days Later won the Saturn Award for Best Horror Film. It also got many other awards nominations, but nothing for the Oscars. If it was going to get nominated for anything with the Oscars, it would probably just be maybe editing.
Yeah, I would agree.
If there was an award for...
Maybe screenplay.
I don't know about the screenplay. It's fine, but it's not award-worthy. If there was ever an award for the best first half or two-thirds of a movie, this would have won that year probably, and so would I Am Legend. But that has to come with the proviso that the second half, or maybe the last third, is the worst part of the movie. So if the first bit's a 10 or at least a 9, the second bit is, or the last little bit, is a 7 at best, maybe even a 6 or a 5. In both cases, both horror films, with similar storylines, I guess, in some ways. This is way past opening thoughts, but you picked this. You wanted to do it last year, but I said let's do it when it's 20 years old, in America at least, in North America. So not opening thoughts, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I honestly did not expect this movie to still hit this hard 20 years and like a million copycats later. But it's still a banger of a zombie movie. It's really fun. It's so stylish. Looks like dog shit. But the movie is so good. And you get so caught up. And of course, the choice to go digital allowed them to be so light on their feet and make all those interesting choices.
Even in the latter part of the movie, when they had way more control and could have taken the time, whatever time they needed to, in the sequences with the soldiers. When you're doing this in London, you said Vanilla Sky. Of course, that's Tom Cruise's movie where he's running through Times Square in New York City. But same basic idea. That was film, of course, about a year before this came out in England.
Much bigger budget. That's the difference.
Yeah. Cameron Crowe, Tom Cruise, asking New York on a Sunday morning, can you just keep people out of Times Square for, I think maybe an hour is what they had. And, of course, Cruise gets to run that way, too. But that was a vivid shot, like you already pointed out, and we get the vivid shots here. In my notes about the chimp, when they let it out and it comes running at the woman, I've got bites woman. I forgot. So it does bite her. But when we see Mailer, it seems like he's just going on the guys and turning them into infecteds as well. I don't think he bites them. If he does, I didn't really see that so much.
I guess it doesn't really matter. You just have to have
exchange
of blood fluids somehow. A chimp might bite because chimps are just more likely to bite than humans are, whereas people are very unlikely to bite another person.
The thing's infected already, but they've also made it watch footage of awful things and made it mad.
Yes. It opens on the scene with 3 layers of cruelty, just cruelty upon cruelty. And the virus hasn't even gotten out yet. It opens with that bank of televisions, and they're all showing violence that you assume is what happened after the virus got out, but then you learn is actually just a compilation of footage that they're showing the chimps to make them angry or make them violent, I suppose.
Get me something to be sick in. I'm going to be sick. Clockwork Orange.
Yes. But it's footage of...
I see that it's wrong. It's like wrong against humanity. Sorry,
all right,
go ahead.
Are you done?
All right, I'm done.
So there's the cruelty of the footage being shown. The violence is committed between the state and civilians. It's protesters and it's cops. It's the army. So it's a very specific kind of violence, too.
Those activists are protesters, really.
Yes. There's the cruelty of the lab itself, who's sacrificing the unwilling animal participants on the altar of understanding, as the scientist puts it. And then there's the cruelty of these activists. They're there to disrupt at any cost, carelessly unleashing hell in the entire country. But first on a man who, I think we're led to believe, thinks he's doing good. He understands that he's hurting these chimps, but it's to spare humanity from worse evils, which, of course, they all inadvertently make the worst possible thing happen to England. So this is how we're introduced to this world. It's set up to keep in mind the way we're always turning on each other, and ultimately, like all great zombie films, it does come down to the living against the living. Times of stress make us come together, but they also make us turn on one another. And it opens up opportunities for would-be tyrants to live out their dictator fantasies on this small scale, like the commander does. Commander Henry West, played by...
Christopher Eccleston.
Yeah, who was in Danny Boyle's first film, Shallow Grave.
And also he was in The Others, which we've covered. A couple years ago we did that. That was for Alejandro Amenabar, I believe. And Vanilla Sky is based on one of his movies, Open Your Eyes. Open Your Eyes! Look at all these tie-ins. But let's get back to the chimp thing, because after we see the chimp has the red eyes, which of course sets us up to know that if you've got that, you're infected. Then we see 28 days later, ... bottom right of the screen. I think Traffic is the same way. I mentioned Traffic already. I think it's the bottom left or something. That's where the title is. It's tiny. Barely even see it on screen.
But in Traffic, that title doesn't also tell the audience something.
It's a storytelling device.
Yeah, it's a storytelling device. I love that.
And it's so at the very end, too, when Jim should have died after getting shot, and then the car accident with Hannah. It looks like maybe he and Selena are both going to get fucked up by the back seat by ramming into it when she goes through the gate.
The original ending of the film...
They had many endings.
Because they did have many endings, but their first cut of the film, it ends on that freeze frame of them in the car accident, partly because it's supposed to be a cool and ambiguous ending, and partly because they simply ran out of money. So when the studio saw this, and they loved the movie, but they hated the ending, they were like, what if we just give you a pile of money to shoot a happy ending where we see that everybody's okay in the end?
They had one where Jim dies, though.
Yeah, there's a version where Jim dies, and I guess in test screenings, or maybe they just decided it was best if they lived. Most zombie movies do not have this optimistic of an ending. Not just a happy ending, but romantic coupling come out of it. It ends with a wedding in a way.
Basically,
with a kid, yeah. It ends with this happy pastoral family, and not even just hope for the future, a full-blown rescue, assuming that wherever they end up, they can just carry on with a relatively normal life.
Do you think he saw us this time? The last line that Selena has about the jet. And then, maybe they end up in a community like in 28 Weeks Later, which for a while was working until the storyline in that happens. Robert Carlyle. It's basically his fault. Other people's too, but it's his fault that things fall apart. Boyle didn't direct that, somebody else did, but Andrew MacDonald, who produced this and a lot of other Boyle films, when we go through the technical people, you're going to hear me say a lot of times, and they worked with Boyle again on something else. Well, MacDonald worked with them a lot of times, I think including on Trainspotting, but then he produced the next movie. I think Boyle did as well, but he did not direct. So after the 28 days later, ... in the beginning, then we see Jim waking up naked in the hospital. Now, not being naked because it's TV, but there's an homage there, I think.
No, oh, this is cool.
Well, let me finish the point. It's The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead.
Where Rick wakes up alone in a hospital and doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, any Walking Dead fan, and we know there's a lot of Walking Dead fans out of there. It was, at one point, the most popular cable television show. Fans will remember that The Walking Dead starts almost exactly like 28 Days Later does. Rick wakes up in the hospital. He was in a coma. He's recovered enough to stumble around and discover corpses and zombies in the hospital with him. It's different like that. So Robert Kirkman, who wrote the comic, The Walking Dead, that the TV show is based on, tells a story about how just weeks before the comic was going to hit the shelves, it's all printed, it's all ready to go. He's starting his press tour. He goes to see this movie 28 Days Later, and he sees that they open the movie in the exact same way, and he's just kind of like, okay, well, great minds think alike. The truth is, this kind of stuff happens all the time. People always want to call other people plagiarists. But I remember when I used to do stand-up comedy, a bunch of people would write the same jokes the same week, and we would all go out and do open mics. And it was the most mysterious thing, but people think of the same ideas. They don't know what triggers it, but they're subconsciously influenced by the same things. It's why 2 volcano movies come out the same year, 2 insect movies come out the same year, whatever. You name it, there's 100 examples.
But this is set apart from The Walking Dead even, because Jim is buck naked. Makes you wonder why the hell that happened, regardless of this infected apocalypse. And also he has a giant scar on his head. Now, he does explain later he was a bike courier who was in an accident. He remembers that. Next thing he knows, he wakes up naked in the hospital. So the side of his head has been shaved, but it's also growing back in because he's been laying there for a little while, I guess. But why was he buck naked? And also, that big a scar, and he's just fine? Apart from the fact he has no weight on him because he lost so much weight because he wasn't eating.
He's just a slender guy to begin with. He should not have survived that coma. You were right. But why overthink it? It's a great conceit. It's a great way for a character to learn about a world like this.
Well, my point is, why is he naked, though?
Okay, so why is he
Where's
naked?
his gown, at
least? I
least?
think that the nudity is kind of like the empty hospital. Okay, if you think about it, then there's definitely no explanation, because even coma patients have gowns on. In 2003, when we saw this movie, male nudity was so shocking. I think it was just a device to put the audience in a place that felt really surreal and ready for anything. To see a penis in the first 5 minutes of a film, whether it be sexual or not, was really rare.
Jim did not believe in grooming either.
Well, he'd been in a coma.
I don't think he was grooming anyway.
Stop staring at Cillian Murphy's penis, Ryan.
I'll let you do that.
And it could also be just the device of vulnerability.
Oh, yeah.
When somebody's naked is so vulnerable.
Those are the logical answers. I think it's just fun to speculate.
It's just artistically, of course, you could speculate and say none of this makes sense. Well, none of it makes sense, period.
This is more believable than a zombie apocalypse is, though.
Yeah, it actually is more grounded
they're not
in
dead.
reality than
and they
the
are
average.
starving at the very end. When you see the jet flying overhead and you see 1 or 2 of the infected by a bridge or something like that, hear the noise and look up, they're not moving anymore. They're not really doing anything. I guess the notion is that they're starving to death finally. Because they're still people, just really fucked up. Another thing about this movie when he wanders through London before he meets Mark and Selena is the wall of missing people, which happened because they made it before 9/11. The pictures and the drawings and the notes about missing people. Where is my brother? Where's my dad? Where's my sister? That kind of stuff. And Boyle, I don't know if he was bothered by it because he thought, we shot it before that happened. What do you want me to do? And it's still a great image. And I don't know, are you actually disrespecting 9/11 if you have images like this in films?
Were people bothered by that?
Apparently they were.
Oh. But stuff like that happened before 9/11. That's just a thing that happens after there's a huge disaster.
Cruise is covered in people dust in War of the Worlds when everything first goes to hell in that movie. Gets back home, shakes it off himself with that stunned look in his face. And I remember one reviewer saying, oh, that's just offensive because it's 9/11 reference because people were covered in dust when all the buildings came down.
The book was written well before 9/11
Decades
happened.
before, right.
9/11 wasn't the first and only disaster.
I know.
Any production that was already underway when 9/11 happened, poor productions that had sensitive material that they had to shelf because of that disaster.
Right.
Not disaster, terrorist attack.
And we do find out that Paris and New York are infected as well, so there's another link to New York.
But are they? They are told that through the media. They learn that through the media.
Bloody media.
But is it implied that they were lying to the people of England so they would stop trying to cross the channel and potentially infect mainland Europe?
Okay.
Because once you infect mainland Europe,
It's over.
Truly over. But they are on an island, as they say. And when they see the airplane fly overhead, well, that's evidence right there that
There's some normalcy.
if Paris was infected, nobody would be flying over England.
Yeah, well, spoiler alert. spoiler alert, I think it's at the end of 28 Weeks Later where you see some kind of weird-looking camera shot, typical for these two movies. And then it comes up and you see the Eiffel Tower and the infected are running through. So now definitely they've gotten to Paris. But I do like your theory just there that they're being lied to. That's pretty good. And then what's the first, well, not the first, but one of the first things that Jim does after trying to find something to drink and something to eat, he goes to a church. Makes you wonder if he was religious because he goes there at all. And the priest is the first, I guess you could say, person. No, he sees a few people who are infected down in the pews when he says, hello. I love how quiet that was because first he's yelling like I did at the beginning of this podcast. Of course, obviously he's doing that. You're not going to say hello when you're standing on a bridge outside in Piccadilly Circus. But in the church, he barely says anything. You see them go, who's that?
But the way they do it, the expression, maybe they were stuntmen, maybe they were just simply extras. Mm-hmm. Probably they were actors that were cast. And they have this blank look on their face. This animal
I'm going to fuck you up look as well, though.
Yes. Terrifying. So scary. So eerie. And they wake up from a pile of corpses. So we know they're sleeping with the corpses until they are made aware that somebody's there and go into attack mode.
But the first one that attacks him is the priest.
The priest. And he hits the priest, and then he's like, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. So I agree with you. I think he's obviously religious. When he goes to the church, he's looking for help because he's a religious person. I mean, he's kind of an innocent at the beginning of the film, right? Well, he's an innocent. He didn't live through all of the trauma that everybody else lived through. But also he's a nice guy that wants to see the best of everybody and doesn't have a stomach for violence at all. He's kind of a peaceful dude. And all of the institutions, things he trusts, get torn down and destroyed for him one by one. It starts with the hospital. There's no safety or help to be found in this hospital. And then there's no salvation in the church. And then...
Well, before that, downtown, no one's around. So
no one's around, yeah, no people.
Hitting the priest who comes at him makes more sense in this vibe because it's been at least a matter of minutes. This isn't normal. If he hit the priest immediately, if it was the priest in the hospital, that would be less believable.
If there had been an infected doctor at the hospital, yeah, he may have been taken down because he's... not a rube, but he's just so
And this
naive.
world is a rube, and he needs to be so we can learn what's going on because they tell him, Selena and Mark tell him, and in turn tell us.
Oh, it's a great writing device because it gives the movie an opportunity to explain to the audience what's happening because they have to explain it to Jim. So they have no help in the hospital, no salvation in the church. Then he meets Mark and Selena, and where's the first place they go together? They go to his house. He goes to see his mom and dad, and we know he loves them. We know that they love him. It looks like he's an only child. And they're dead in their bed.
They took
killed
pills,
themselves, and it's very macabre. You see their rotting corpses. They're holding a picture of him, and the back of the picture says, never wake up.
Yep.
Like a dream theme there, too.
But what they write is not all negative. It's mostly positive. It's, we love you, Jim, but don't wake up.
Yeah, we don't want you to wake up. We don't want you to experience what we've experienced. Where do they go next? They follow the radio signal. The military will help us. Well, the military turns out to be the worst kind of enemy because they are human.
That's not next.
They're still not.
That's not next because, of course, in his house is when Mark gets killed because he gets bitten or something. Must be bitten, but the blood merged, and that's all that really matters. We see Selena, so matter of fact, just slash him to death. She's the Michonne, going back to Walking Dead, of this movie. And apparently the backstory, which we never learned, but it's supposed to be that Selena had to kill her own family. So that's why.
Very Michonne, yeah.
And that's how she can. Yeah, Michonne had to do the same thing with her husband or boyfriend or something. That's how we know Selena's so tough. Well, we don't know that, but when you know the backstory, it's always fun to know these things, even if they aren't in the movie, because then it does power the character that much more. You see why and how she could be such a badass, because this movie belongs to her.
It ought to.
Naomi Harris, if we didn't say her name yet, she's, of course, become quite a star. She's in the Bond movies as Monopenner. And she was in the Pirates movies. And, of course, she was in Moonlight. We covered that a couple years ago. She's beautiful. She's very talented. But in this, she's also a very believable badass. And I'd follow her.
Oh, I would follow her. And you say, oh, the movie belongs to her, except it should belong to her, but it doesn't. I heard this described once as Trinity syndrome. It describes a strong female character who introduces our less impressive male protagonist to the world of the movie where she's hyper competent and rational. So you think Trinity, you think Gamora, you think Princess Leia is another great example. There's varying degrees of how dumb or how smart they are. I think, well, Selena is definitely a victim of the third act curse to all tough women, where she suddenly is no longer tough. She becomes a damsel in distress. And Jim, who has been at her mercy this whole movie, needing protection from her, suddenly becomes her protector. It's all about his journey. And she's just there to introduce him to the world, to keep him safe, and then to give him someone to save, a romantic partner in this case as well.
All that's true, yet the movie still belongs to Naomi Harris, I think, because I want it to.
Maybe this is also you and I disagreeing because you like looking at her and I like looking at Cillian Murphy in this movie because he is beautiful in this movie.
He looks terrible and still looks good.
Whew.
That's how attractive he actually is.
It is a lot. I haven't seen this movie in a little while and I see pictures of him now. Not like he's not a good looking man, but I was like, why did I have such a crush on him back then? And then I go back and watch this movie and go, oh, right. Because he was gorgeous.
And Harris has looked better in other things. Moonlight she didn't, because she's a drug addict in that film. But you see her on IMDb or something, and you're reminded all over again, wow, she and Janelle Monáe are in the same movie together, meaning Moonlight. Man. But you talked about how the military is another one that they can't rely on, and that's true, but I cut you off because the best sequence in this entire movie is probably the middle. Okay, the opening 10, 15, 20 minutes is the best thing. Okay, fine. But from a character standpoint, from an I care standpoint, it's when we meet Brendan Gleeson and Megan Burns.
Who play Frank and Hannah.
And Gleeson had been in so many things before this. Of course, I always think of him first from Braveheart. Maybe he'd made things before that, but he is Mel Gibson's best friend in that. He's Hamish. We covered AI. I think he's the guy who's in charge of the Flesh Fair when the toys are being broken up and thrown around and burned for people's amusement. I think he's in charge of that. He's the ringleader of that. But we've only ever reviewed a movie of his. I think that's one time. Harry Potter, of course. If people haven't seen Banshees of Inisherin, which is on Disney Plus now, maybe it's Hulu. I would say Disney Plus, and maybe for America it might be Hulu. Whatever. For us, it's Disney Plus. That was very much worth the hype. He and Farrell especially, are great together. But he has one of his better roles in this movie, and he's basically only in the middle section. He's so likable and such a sweet guy and cares so much. But also, right before he dies, he's so angry when he finds out that they went out there for nothing, or he thinks they went out there for nothing. And in a way they did, because look what happens. But he's furious, and then getting mad at the bird, it just is pecking away at a dead person's face, who obviously had the virus. Gets a tiny drop in his eye. He knows enough to get Hannah away from him, but he was already mad. So if they didn't kill him, I mean the soldiers almost immediately, he might have been the most effective, Incredible Hulk-like rage monster of any of them, because he was mad to begin with, much like the chimp. We've made you mad, we've made you mad, we've made you mad. So when it goes after the people, it attacks worse than it probably would have if it weren't for the fact it was watching all these videos to make it angry. Frank would have been like that. And you said Jim is pretty useless to realize he's Selena's backseat passenger, if you will. Not the leader, until he is at the end. Well, had he gotten the virus at any point when he is just killing people, gouging a guy's eyes out, he would have been even better than Frank would have been as a rage monster if he had gotten the virus and lived. Because he was already so mad.
And thematically, it works. Frank, who's a pretty affable, optimistic guy.
I just said, he's a very sweet guy.
Yeah. So he succumbs to rage, and then he succumbs to rage. It's a metaphor.
It's such a heartbreaking death, too, because his own daughter has to watch it right in front of them. And I guess their mother died, probably through the virus, and maybe when they were running away from infected people, and she got left behind, who knows. But he's a great guy, and he takes them in. But much like The Walking Dead, again, we said that when you were still watching it, maybe several years ago, because you haven't watched it in quite a few years. I pointed out to you that in this series, because it went on so long, this is probably true about zombie movies too, but in that series, everywhere Rick and the people go, they ruin it.
Everywhere they
Maybe
go.
the governor was awful, and maybe this person was awful, and that person was awful leading these little communities, but it's the Walking Dead people that fuck it up every time.
Even if the community was awful, by the time Rick leaves, almost all of them are dead.
Yeah.
They'll always take a few of them with them. They'll gather a few members from one tribe to the next, but they leave absolute terror in their wake everywhere they go.
Well, the sequence I love so much, 2 in a row actually, and I thought the editing was different, and the nice sequence was first, but it's afterwards, and that is the tunnel and the grocery store. So the tunnel first. I was legit tense, even though I've seen this movie probably 5 times over the years, when they're in the tunnel trying to change that flat tire, first with the rats, and then with the infected, who do have to get over that barrier, so they do have a little bit more time. But when Hannah is the one who's changing the tire, and everyone's just lifting it up physically because the jack, there's no time for any of that, that's a good, effective horror movie when you still have me, come on, kid, do it, you're going to die. Oh, God, they barely got away. But then you get this great reprieve, one of the sweetest moments in any horror film probably ever, when the 4 of them are just taking whatever they want from the grocery store. Frank takes, 4 or 5 bottles of beautiful, expensive scotch, which, as you point out, the Major is drinking later on.
Everything they grab at the grocery store, we later see the soldiers pillaging.
And why wouldn't they, of course?
Sure.
They're terrible people, but I don't blame them for that. They need to eat food, too.
They don't need to drink scotch, though.
Well, doesn't he share it with Jim? Because he wants Jim to be part of the
But
community.
he has the 4 boxes of scotch sitting on his desk. It's not his to share with Jim. It's Jim's to share with him.
Or even Hannah's, because her dad's the one that took it from the store.
Good point, but it's not Commander West. He simply took it. There's a scene where they are pillaging from their car and just taking everything.
And of course they
want. Yeah.
But that grocery store sequence has one thing I love at the end that I never really thought about before. It's cute and it's fun. And then, of course, you get into the music I talked about, where they're going into the countryside with that Ascension-type music and ending, whatever it's called. But when he leaves his credit card I never thought of it this way before, but it's almost like saying, I'll never need this again. Which, of course, he doesn't. But that really, in some ways, even though he's not yet, because he does when he finds out there's nobody at that barricade, but it's like he's giving up. Because you got to hope that somehow there can be a future.
Oh, I read it differently. I think part of the popularity of zombie movies, whether people really understand why this affects them one way or the other or not, is there's an element of fantasy. We all picture that we'll be the survivors. We'll be the ones to get to raid the grocery store and take everything we want. Dawn of the Dead, great example. What kid, especially, doesn't fantasize about being left alone in the mall and being able to help themselves to any item they want? Everything, be it food, be it clothes, be it gadgets and toys or whatever. You name it, it's available for the taking and you don't have to pay for anything. So I think that the idea of money no longer being an object is a part of the fantasy. We've had to go through this horror, but we get to leave the world of capitalism behind and we never have to worry about paying for our food again or our clothes or anything that we can gather. And it's an element you see in a lot of, not just zombie movies, but I think post-apocalypse movies. You'll see people living in an abandoned mansion and driving nice cars. Having the world to yourself is kind of a fantasy.
I know, but there's just a part of me that feels a little sad, though, too, that this guy who isn't yet actually giving up, and soon will, a couple days later, and maybe 10, 15 minutes later in the storyline time, but at that moment is saying, we'll never be normal again. And 28 weeks later, they do have that community that's pretty normal, I believe, and you see it a lot in The Walking Dead, where they have barricades and then people can live somewhat normally.
If they don't have credit cards.
I know. I love the moment because it is a great little thing. And then the very last shot of that sequence before they drive into the countryside from Manchester is the 4 grocery carts on the sidewalk, which also is both, I think, positive and sad. Because it's a bit funny in a way.
Yeah.
But it's also sad that we're leaving this behind. We'll never be back here.
The show that does this better than anything I've ever seen is Last Man on Earth. A kind of underseen sitcom starring Will Forte, where it's almost like the entire show.
He bathes in booze.
He has to go to the liquor store. He just drives his car through the window to get in there.
And drives all kinds of different cars, because why not?
Yeah.
So it's around this time when Jim does kill that infected kid during a stop for gas. Frank is pumping gas into a can, and Jim, for no good reason, goes into a place that says they have cheeseburgers. Well, you're not going to get a cheeseburger. No one cooked it, dummy. But the kid attacks me. He has no choice but to kill him. So it's almost like the George Clooney thing out of sight. Don Cheadle asks George Clooney, "You never killed before, right?" "Not until recently, no." Meaning seconds before when I killed your best friend because he was part of this deal and also probably raping Midge. Isaiah Washington was doing that. But in this, Jim's obviously never hurt or killed anybody before. And we don't see it happen, but we know he killed that kid. I think he talks about it with West when they're in the compound as well. And you're not going to feel bad for the kid because he's never going to probably be normal again anyway. But Jim didn't have to go in there. But it's probably a mercy killing, though, too, because the kid's infected.
It's also just a way to inject a little bit of action.
And give him something to do. Show he is capable of killing before he ever actually has to.
Yeah, of course. More importantly is that it's his first kill, and it's a child of all people. And he doesn't seem overly traumatized by it. We recently covered The Poseidon Adventure, a movie I liked much better than I expected to. But it has that annoying trope of characters who are just persistently falling apart in the face of peril and becoming a burden on the people who are around
Nani.
them. She is dragging people down because she can't just get her act together and climb a ladder, for crying out loud. It's nice that this movie doesn't fall back on that as just a form of conflict.
Even though Selena's the one that has to teach him how to do things and drag him along, basically. She does acknowledge that he's crashing because all he's really had is sugar, and he has no fat in his body to begin with. Because they can't cook. She even says in the grocery store, don't get something we have to cook. We're eating a lot of beans in this world. During the country interlude I've already talked about a few times, though, Selena gives Jim a quick peck on the cheek. So even though she was the one that says, I'll kill you if I have to, meaning I don't care about you, that's also practical. Even if you do care about somebody, if they've got this virus, you got to kill them, and Selena knows it better than anybody. But she does kiss him before he ever kisses her, which is later in the film. And then clearly after, well, I guess a month has passed, somehow he's recovered from that bullet wound. Although, as you point out, they do say she's a chemist, so she knows about the human body.
Chemist, which is pharmacist. So
pharmacist,
healthcare.
sorry.
They call her a chemist.
So she's not a doctor or a surgeon, but I guess she could.
She would know how to do CPR. She would know how to do
but he got
first aid
shot.
and stuff. Yeah, but she would know then about which antibiotics she should give him and basic healthcare stuff that you and I wouldn't know.
Makes you wonder where they really are. It's out in the country still, in some little cottage, and they go outside without thinking twice about the fact that an infected person could be right there. And we see some of them laying around when the jet's flying overhead, not that far from them, but they're just setting up their help sign so matter-of-factly.
Well, it is 28 days later.
And the infected are dying.
The infected are dying. They're in the middle of nowhere. Maybe they have found that they are far enough away from society that the infected aren't really finding them. They're just quietly living their life, sewing their giant sign. Great touch, too. We haven't talked that much yet about how it opens with all the hellos. Well, you started with the hellos for like 5 minutes. It's not the only thing Jim says, but it's hello, is anybody out there? And hello itself is a word to focus on that they come back to over and over again, but especially in the ending where they have this giant thing made of fabric, this sign that says hello, although we see it when it's just the first 3 letters plus what looks like it's going to be a P to make help, but then we're surprised and it's delightful to see that it makes hello instead. There's something about that word that is so optimistic and welcoming.
Yep.
Rather than help, rather than distress, it is something that is more of an invitation.
And through this time of his recovery, and before that, for that matter, Selena's really cared about Hannah. She cries about Hannah's future, partly because her father died. I think it's supposed to have been minutes before when they were at that blockade. And the soldiers, rightly, blew him away, although Hannah had to watch that, unfortunately. But Selena has come to care for her in a very brief period of time. And obviously, the two of them are a team, because Jim would have been bedridden for a little while after all that happened. But I also like when she talks about, again, it's set up earlier, the don't care drugs, when they're trying to sleep and they can't. And Frank will let Hannah have a little bit of one, a half a tab of a don't care drug.
Which is just Valium.
And that, and that comes up later on when they're going to be raped for the night by all these guys. Selena will give Hannah the drug, so things will be terrible for you, but you won't care as much. Which, again, is both a positive thing. I'm helping you, but for that reason? And that's the problem here. I get actually the motivation and how this could be real. You're trying to bring people to your community, specifically women, of course. You asked why they didn't just kill Jim on the spot. Well, of course, because the story has to go where the story goes, is the actual answer there. And maybe because they do want other people. You want to have some kind of long-term community. There's only, 9 of them there? So Jim would make 10. The women would count, but they wouldn't count at the same point. But I can understand the logic. I know it's terrible to say this, but when there's no people really left in the world anymore, they've probably had this radio signal out there for a while, and these 3 people come along, the men were going to kill themselves because they had no future. So here's a future, A, with sex, and B, with possibly children, and we can maybe rebuild something. So it's awful, but I get the basic logic of that. And they don't make Major West seem like he's not a frothing bad guy. Mailer's frothing, but he's not. The other guys are really over the top. His men are, but he's not.
But he is. He's just...
No, he's not played over the top.
Yeah. But he has the veneer of civility to cover up the fact that he is a frothing at the mouth bad guy. Actually, it's almost over the top. Just how evil these soldiers turn out to be.
In a month.
In a month. What? Is it really that hard to believe that a ragtag group of soldiers with no rules anymore might turn into the broiest rapists
Good
ever?
point. It might be a matter of hours.
Right, exactly. So it's not very hard for me to believe. And they do such a wonderful job of creating this sense of menace. As soon as they get to this mansion, and it's gloomy, and the ceilings are high, but there's just no real relief to be had. Right away, you meet Jones, the soldier who they treat like a girl. He wears an apron, he's cooking, and they're so cruel to him. Just kind of like a little introduction for Hannah and Selena to be like, well, that's our future. If this is how they treat the girliest soldier.
They may have been treating him in other ways that I'm thinking about right now and hadn't thought of until right now.
Yeah, he could have been like their prison wife, whatever was going on there. There was definitely some very weird vibes happening. Like you said, it took only a month for them to devolve into this kind of group. So, the girls are squeamish. You can tell that Jim is also not comfortable here, and they're trying to keep their distance, but who are they against soldiers? Well, it turns out that Jim is actually a monster who can conjure up this side of himself that can take down an entire group of soldiers.
When he's half naked, as he is through a lot of this movie.
What's the name of the soldier that was infected?
Mailer.
Mailer. He does it because he unleashes Mailer inside, which was a hell of a gamble when you consider that Selena and Hannah are in the mansion.
When Mailer attacks, they're there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And they don't have weapons.
And he cares about them. But obviously the subtext is that this guy has rage too. And then Hannah clocks him on the back of the head. Lucky he doesn't knock him out. But she thinks that he's infected and attacking Selena.
It's not like it falls apart, but it is disappointing compared to the first 2 acts of the movie that are just so solid. The whole movie is really entertaining. It's really stylish. It's very fun to watch. But the third act just thematically doesn't work for me. It doesn't make sense to me that Jim is the one that goes crazy. It doesn't feel to me like it's building up to that moment appropriately. If he's going to go that crazy, then why does he then have his happy, relaxed ending? Why isn't there some kind of psychic consequences for him?
Been another month, though.
But then what was the point of all of that? If it still is an optimistic movie that is implying that the good guys won and they're going to get rescued and everything's going to be fine, what is the movie trying to say with this horrific, dark, and it feels like it stands alone from the rest of the movie?
Well, the key there, you said it, that they got money to reshoot. They intended to have a dark, typical zombie ending. Night of the Living Dead, one of the great endings of all time, where our hero managed to last the whole night. You're thinking, okay, he's going to join this posse. Instead, they kill him. Now, did they do it because he's a black man? But he's stumbling around like he's one of the zombies, so I can understand why they would shoot him at the same point. But that's an incredible ending, because I remember when I first saw that movie, I thought, he lived. Oh, no, he didn't. But you can get why they would shoot him. And also, it probably is racism, and those guys do seem like a lynch mob in Pennsylvania, of all places, although they can be anywhere, I guess. This movie probably should have ended, like you said, with that car crash, with the two of them in the back seat coming forward, and then the suggestion could be that they didn't even get out of there because Hannah's trying to use a cab, which has some power behind it, but to go through a locked gate, a heavy wrought iron gate, it maybe wouldn't go through if they tried to bash it many times. I love that in Logan, where he's got this powerful limo going through what seems to be a relatively breakable fence. It takes multiple times before he gets through it.
And nobody has seatbelts on. They're all just loosey-goosey in that car.
That probably should have ended like that. It may be dark, but that's your ending.
I'm so torn because on one hand, I agree with you. On the other hand, I want them to live so bad.
Yeah, I do too, but they shouldn't at the same point. Well, Cillian Murphy, we've covered him twice before. He was in Inception, and he has a very small role in The Dark Knight, which we covered, but of course he's the main villain in Batman Begins, and he was in all three of those as Scarecrow, the 3 Nolan Batman films. I talked about Naomi Harris's credits already and raved about her. I want to see her do more big things. She's usually the supporting part of something big. Let's see her be a lead in something. Megan Burns, the girl, Hannah, only was in 2 movies, and then she made a short after this. That's it. She got into making music. Eccleston we talked about, Gleason we talked about, and then Noah Huntley is Mark, who's got a decent amount of screen time in the beginning before Selena just slaughters him. He was in the Chronicles of Narnia after this, and also Snow White and the Huntsman, so we've seen a lot of fantasy in his film career, because this is fantasy, obviously. But this is more realistic than a lot of other things we've talked about, including those 2 movies. Danny Boyle, I said he did Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire, which we've covered before. Alex Garland wrote other movies for Boyle, and he's also now since directed, and I think he also wrote these, Ex Machina and Men.
And Annihilation.
Right, and we watched Men not that long ago. Interesting movie, had some of the better scares, for you at least, in a long time. We watched it at home, too. If we'd seen it in the theater, it would have been more effective, I guess. McDonald, I talked about, the producer, did Trainspotting, other Boyle films, and 28 Weeks Later. The movie's 185-1. We saw it on our Blu-ray. Cinematographer shooting this movie that doesn't look very good, but he does a good job considering that, I think. The lighting is fine. It's just that the final product is not that great. Anthony Dodd Mantle shot Slumdog for Boyle and other Boyle films, and then also shot Rush, the Ron Howard racing movie, which Chris and I covered for Scoring at the Movies a couple years ago or sometime last year maybe. That's a beautiful film, and a very good racing film as well. The editor, Chris Gill, cut the sequel, and also many other Boyle films. And the composer, John Murphy, did the sequel, other Boyle films, and also the recent Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. So what do you think about the cutting in this thing? We've talked about the look already and the music.
Well, I think I've already mentioned several times in the podcast that as much as it looks terrible because it's shot on SD, I adore how much they took advantage of the lightweight of that camera, the size of that camera. They got really interesting shots. They got lots of variety. The editing is really cool. It's a very well-edited film, even though it's very late 90s, early 2000s, that really cutty, aggressive music video type look, but it works really, really well in this film. It's just executed excellently. And the score is wonderful. You can
the driving loud score at the very end, especially when everything's going to hell.
Yeah. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about how influential this film was. Before this movie came out, I don't even really remember a ton of zombie properties. You would see zombies in like an episode of The Simpsons. You would see zombies as a trope that existed, but the zombie film was all but dead.
Pun intended.
There you go. This reanimated the genre of zombie at all, especially as a serious film, not a jokey, campy genre. After this, people took zombie movies seriously. Fast zombies, obviously highly influential. Those did not exist before 28 Days Later. Zombies were those slow-moving corpses. But anything you may have liked about zombie movies in this century got greenlit because of this movie in the first place. Yeah.
Infected.
Although, we can't give it all the credit. Alex Garland has said the idea for writing a zombie movie came from how much he loved the game Resident Evil.
That was huge. What happens next? Well, I think that jet comes back and opens fire.
I thought that.
Like, why it would, I don't know.
But I don't know. Why wouldn't it? Why would you risk this happening to the whole world for a handful of survivors? But
it is nice to think that these 3 people had at least some kind of little bliss, whether they lived or not. Okay, then last thoughts on 28 Days Later, your second last choice in the month of Bev. We've got one more coming up.
I love this movie as much as I did in my 20s.
And I still found it thrilling. I guess you probably did too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And I love Gleason's part of it. It may not be much, but he gives the movie so much heart. It's funny, he dies, and right away we meet these soldiers that kill him, and they're the problem with the second half, the last third or so of this picture. Because the first half is a 9 or a 10 out of 10. The last third is more like a 6 maybe. But at least Naomi Harris is in the whole thing. Why wouldn't this woman, who's been portrayed as such a tough person, try to fight back? Well, A, nothing's happening yet, even though they had to dress in these dresses and look nice, which is not the way she's been the whole movie. Obviously, she's very practical. But also, she did take the don't care pills.
But I think the main reason is because Jim is the one with the arc.
Yeah, that's also true.
He has to rescue them.
I want this movie to be hers, so I'm saying it is. Okay, then some ending notes here. This podcast can also be found on YouTube, if you'd like to hear us while our graphic stares back at you. We've been doing 9 or 10 minutes of bonus footage the first few weeks of the month. So right now, as we record this, we've only done 2 of those. Looks like we might keep doing that. If we have, well, actually, type corrections, that's the place we'll make them. That's become an official thing, I think, now. Plus, we've been talking about new movies we've seen, so that's timely. And we've been mentioning listener names lately by discussing comments they made about our podcast. So go to @HYES Ellis. So have you ever seen Ellis is what that is our last name. And you'll see our growing archive on YouTube. In 4 days, I will post another solo episode. We've never discussed Mae West on this channel before, so that will be rectified once I see what she and Cary Grant are up to in the movie that grammar teachers must hate, She Done Him Wrong. And in 7 days, you and I will wrap up the month of Bev and talk about the 5th movie you've chosen. We started the month with a movie about musicians, A Star is Born, and now we'll end it with another one. We actually covered this movie before, but we didn't use our whole ass. We were half-assed. That was the end of December 2013. We did what we called the Now Playing Project for a few months back then, where we gave our skinny on something we had just seen on the big screen, so not really any prep at all. So let's reanalyze some of these movies this year. The first one's going to be Inside Llewyn Davis. That's the first time we've ever properly, at least, reviewed Oscar Isaac. And, of course, we've many times reviewed the Coen brothers.
Just realized a lot of the movies I picked for the month of Bev this year have hot guys in them. I'm just going to pretend that was an accident.
I was a little surprised you didn't have any woman-directed films, but you do have a lot of hot dudes. But we'll be talking about woman-directed films very soon in the next couple of months. Anyway, the coming attractions trivia for Inside Llewyn Davis. We have talked a little bit in the past about the BBC Culture's 2016 poll that ranked the 100 greatest films of the 21st century. Inside Llewyn Davis was 11th. How many other Coen brothers movies made that top 100?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Inside Llewyn Davis. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen. And if you already followed us as Top 100 Project, nothing will change, including access to our archives, as Ryan said.
And also look for us on YouTube.
And look for us on YouTube.
@HYES Ellis.
And we're also both on Twitter. I'm @BevEllisEllis. Ryan is @MovieThemed51. Or you can reach us by email, haveyouvrseenpodcast@gmail.com. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Do you think they heard our podcast this time?